Battlefield 2042 was revealed to the world back in June, and as more and more information started to come out about it, people have become more and more interested. Granted, not every single detail we've heard so far is particularly optimistic, but generally speaking, the game looks extremely promising. One of the most fascinating ideas it presents is essentially packaging 3 different games together. The normal Battlefield 2042 experience, the cooperative Hazard Zone mode, which we don't know much about at the moment, but according to certain info that has either leaked or was data mined, might be a free-to-play mode that's similar to Escape from Tarkov. We're not totally sure yet. And then there's Portal, the ultimate love letter to fans and past Battlefield games that gives players ultimate control over their Battlefield experience with a remarkably in-depth rule set editor, offering far more options and things to modify than any game that came before. When 2042 releases, it'll basically be 3 games in one, and they all look very interesting in their own ways, and that's really cool. However, there's one specific feature that I look forward to the most in the upcoming game: bots. For the last several games, AI-controlled bots have been limited to appearances as normal enemies in the single-player campaigns. They haven't participated in any multiplayer modes since the Battlefield 2 era well over a decade ago. Their implementation back then wasn't life-changing, but they did their job as support and as fodder for when players wished to have some target practice before playing with humans online, or when they couldn't play online at all, or just didn't want to. They seem like relics of a bygone era of first-person shooters, because the increasing spread of internet access kinda made them seem unnecessary. But as time passed, more and more have begun to seek them out again. More recently, bots have appeared in Star Wars Battlefront 2, another game made by DICE. The Supremacy game mode features 20 versus 20 human players, but with 12 bots on each team to bolster numbers to 32 participants each. And from what I can see, the Battlefield community feels quite positive about their inclusion. They're reliable to the point of being better teammates or enemies than many below-average human players. Now, you might be wondering why I care so much about the inclusion of bots. Some of you may even think that such a feature might hurt the overall player versus player aspect of Battlefield, but I actually think they could help bolster it in some key ways. First of all, assuming that the bots are programmed to be fairly competent and overall not very distinguishable from a half-decent human player, they could be dependable teammates in their own right. Let's just be honest here. If they're designed to actually drop health and ammo packs when nearby team members actually need them, then they would already be better support or medic players than a decent amount of humans. If they actually stop and repair nearby team vehicles that are below a certain health threshold, then they're already better engineers than a decent amount of humans. If they're designed to revive killed team members without getting killed themselves in the process, then they're already better than a decent amount of humans. If they're designed to prioritize the capturing of flags with low enemy traffic and actually stick around for a minute or two afterward to help fight off any oncoming threats, then they're already better than a decent amount of humans. Conversely, if the bots are the ones who ask for health or ammo and they don't run away from teammates seeking to give them those things, then they're already better than a decent amount of human players. They don't need to be able to snipe from 500 meters off or mow down an enemy squad with one magazine in order to contribute to a well-paced match. In fact, that could end up being annoying. They really just need to have valuable utility. Make them very proactive in offering support functions and competent enough to simply kill enemies who aren't paying attention. And games of Conquest and Breakthrough can still be quite enjoyable even if they're half filled with bots. My second and biggest reason for being excited about the inclusion of bots is fairly simple: longevity. In a recent earnings call, EA representatives, including CEO Andrew Wilson, had already stated that they've begun their plans for the next Battlefield game after 2042, which is slated for release in 2023, because DICE plans to return to the usual one game every 2 years release pattern. For some people, this might sound worrying, as the last thing the community wants is for another eventual stagnation to occur, because sooner or later they might push one Battlefield out the gate too soon and it suffers for it. Though there's no guarantee DICE is actually rushing anything, they could already have a very clear idea of what they're doing and where the series is going. But there's also no guarantee that you will like any of the games after 2042 as much as you like 2042. Case in point, how many people still prefer Battlefield 4 over Hardline 1 and 5? This begs one specific consideration: the activity of games as they grow older. If EA and DICE go back to a biennial launch pattern, then that means in 6 years we'll have 3 more Battlefields out after 2042. With each one, a portion of the previous game's player bases will move forward. Some will come back to the older game, yes, but at the end of the day, none of these games stay as active 4 years later as they were in the first month. Casual players will fall off and move on to something else, leaving only the most loyal to stay and continue playing. And with this inevitability comes low server population. A lot of people went back to play Battlefield 4 following the reveal of 2042, but in some cases it's still pretty hard to get your own server up and running, especially when you're playing anything that isn't standard rules conquest or team deathmatch or the occasional rush. My friends and I have been playing Battlefield 4 recently, and we honestly lean more towards the infantry side of the game. We will hop into some attack vehicles when we think it's a good idea, but generally speaking, we have more fun with our feet on the ground, and we frankly never like it much when a server turns into an unadulterated helicopter and tank gangbang of constant long-range bombardment. To take a break from those games, we keep an eye out for infantry-focused servers, which are sadly few and far between on the PlayStation 4 version of the game, which is what we all play on. Since we started playing Battlefield 4 again following the hype for 2042, the most fun we've had in one session is a large conquest server that had a lower player cap of 40 and disabled attack vehicles, allowing pure transport only. It was a much more investing and evenly matched setup than what a lot of other servers offered, and it even changed my opinion on some maps. Sadly, we weren't able to find it ever again in the server browser, and we tried to make a copy of it, which ended up not filling up. So we went back to joining the servers full of the typical vehicle-dominant chaos that sometimes gets too out of hand for our tastes. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is, bots will help add activity to servers with niche rule sets. It's very frustrating to make a server and tweak the rules to be exactly how you want it, only to twiddle your thumbs for the next half hour hoping for enough people to join in and actually get things started. And sometimes, they never do. Obviously, the first several months or year or so of 2042 will likely be active enough for this issue to not be too prevalent, especially with crossplay support between platforms. However, 1, 2, or 3 more Battlefield games into the future, if anyone decides to stick with or come back to 2042, they won't have to suffer waiting in an empty server, crossing their fingers to get their game off the ground, only to be disappointed and throw themselves into another meat grinder server that's actually populated. They can simply sit back and pop some bots as the human players slowly come in. Some people have the most fun when they're playing around with weird or specific rules, and the existence of Portal seems to lean into that fact. But right now, in older games, servers with those weird or niche rules might die before they have a chance to live, and bots help a lot with that problem. It won't be a problem for a while, hopefully, but when it does become one in the future, more people will be thankful to have the bots around. The third reason I'm excited for bots is the fact that progression is not excluded from matches with them. This means, unless DICE confirms otherwise, that all content in Battlefield 2042 will be accessible even if you play the game entirely solo with and against bots. You will still rank up, and you will still unlock weapons and attachments like normal. Even if you never play against another human, you'll still receive the full Battlefield experience. This is perfect for anyone who would rather avoid stiffer competition with other humans until they unlock their favorite gear, or anyone who simply doesn't want to play with humans either occasionally or ever. Granted, players like the latter are probably rare, but with the option available to them, they might be willing to play 2042. And even after all of that, you have the simple fact that bots are useful for new players to practice with. 2042 is getting a lot of hype, and thus it may draw in a lot of people who have never touched Battlefield before. Practicing against bots is a more fun and accessible way of learning the ropes without committing to a full match of human players who might destroy you, even if they're not trying to be all that competitive. Of course, there are some potential downsides to the inclusion of the bots too. First, there's the possibility that they could be either too stupid to be useful or too tough to be fun to fight against. I think this isn't a huge worry at the moment though, because I think most people, me included, believe DICE is reliable enough to at least find a safe middle point between those two extremes. But at the end of the day, we'll find out once the game is in our hands. Second, you can't play against bots offline. You still need to be connected to the internet to have them, even if you're the only human player in the server. This seems like a bad idea at first, but if current speculation is true, bots might be controlled by cloud computing and learning, meaning that their intelligence could be dictated by the way the average Battlefield player plays. This puts all the stress of calculating their movements and actions on its own dedicated server instead of using resources client-side, while also making them seem more human-like in behavior. Again, this is only speculation at the moment, but if true, then it could be fascinating and potentially very fun. The third and more relevant problem is that DICE has already confirmed that you cannot disable them for Conquest or Breakthrough. They're mandatory in those modes. And while I do think they're most useful for those modes specifically, I also think the game should offer the option to not include them. Granted, it seems a lot of the desire to have them disabled comes from the assumption that they might be dumb or just plain annoying or less interesting to play with. But whether or not that ends up being the case, some people just want a pure player versus player experience where humans just cause all kinds of improvisational chaos that AI might not be capable of pulling off themselves, unless DICE truly went the distance with their programming. It is true that the bots are supposed to be temporary and will be replaced by humans as they join in, but it might take several matches for a server to fill up, which means several games where people will be forced to play with bots they consider to be less exciting, possibly. I personally would intend to have them enabled basically 100% of the time, but I still think the option should be given, if only for the sake of it. Ultimately, I think bots can be super useful for the longevity of a multiplayer game like this, especially for people who sometimes wish to just play by themselves. Sometimes a person just wants to experiment with weapons or loadouts without committing to a full match, or play without the pressure of keeping up with teammates' expectations, constant nagging, or consistently bad play. In recent years, there's been an increase in the amount of complaints about so-called sweats sucking the fun out of team-based shooters by always playing like their lives depend on it, specifically in unranked matches which aren't intended to be so cutthroat. And I can understand that complaint, because in Battlefield, you typically don't have a choice between playing against serious or casual players. You almost always end up with a mix of the two. If it's a balanced mix, it can be incredibly fun. But in the worst case, you may be seeking a casual match in which you can turn your brain off and have some mindless entertainment because you just love the game, but end up in a server filled with lunatics who seem to hate the idea of allowing you to live longer than 20 seconds at a time. That can get annoying. Competition doesn't feel very fun when you get stomped on the moment you start playing and it becomes immediately obvious that you don't stand a chance. Worst case scenario, you're getting destroyed so quickly that you don't even have the time to understand what you're doing wrong at all. I get it. It's frustrating, and bots can help with that, assuming they're programmed decently. Anyway, I think I've made my point well enough. I'm really excited to see bots return to Battlefield, and I'm looking forward to see how they function and how reliable they are in action. And above all else, My friends and I are happy to know that if we want to make our own server with specific rules, we won't have to sit back and pray for people to actually join, even years after the game's release. This concludes my thoughts on Battlefield 2042's inclusion of bots. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.